So Professor Stagl, thank you for joining us here today at the conference. I'll start straight away with the first question, which is, in the light of the current crises, which steps have to be taken to promote a social, ecological and democratic economy?
Okay, big challenge.
Yeah.
I would frame the answer in 4 different points. And the first one is to remind ourselves to look back to history, where our current thinking comes from. Why have we chosen to focus on GDP, and why has GDP growth become the sole determinant of economic performance and economic success? Well, it came from people living in poverty. It came from a situation where being able to provide for yourself and having a certain choice was very positive and different from the past. So that played a role, played a positive role. We've come a long way, but now that sole focus on GDP growth is too narrow, and it's causing a lot of problems. It's causing a lot of problems on the social side, because by just focusing on GDP growth and not the distribution in an adequate manner, has not provided for a lot of people in society, even in rich countries. Not speaking even about the global south. And secondly, of course, by increasing GDP growth, we are producing more stuff, and we are causing so many environmental disruptions that we are beyond the planetary boundaries. So that's one reasoning, one thinking that I think is essential to rethink that, well, what worked in the past, what was rational, useful, helpful in the past, doesn't necessarily mean that it's rational and useful now. The second strand of an answer that I would give is focusing always on the whole system. It's obvious, of course, that's what we should do, but still we tend to sometimes just focus on elements of it and not thinking about the interdependencies. Our knowledge creation has been developed largely in disciplines. They could be considered as silos. We are not as scientists, we're not very well trained in linking with other sciences. That needs to be enhanced massively. Interdisciplinary research is necessary for raising to these challenges that we are facing with the crises. So I enjoy greatly working with political scientists. I'm an economist myself. I enjoy greatly and learn from natural scientists when learning about the interactions between the economy and the environment. A third strand of an answer would be focus on measuring what really matters, what really counts. As an example, we often hear, well, energy efficiency has increased, material efficiency has increased. Well, that's all good and well. And if it hadn't, we would be even in a worse situation. But it's not good enough. Because if we focus just on the efficiency, well, energy efficiency goes up, GDP continues to go up, so thumbs up twice, but still we are pushing against the planetary boundaries, absolute values, absolute material flows and energy consumed, and CO2 emissions need to be taken into account. That's one of the key propositions of ecological economics. Not only focus on intensities, but focus on the absolute amount of what we are emitting and what we are using. So the physical scale, that's what Herman Daly argued for. And the fourth one, I would argue, acknowledge the responsibility of individuals. Well, individual actors, of course, are in the end those who are making decisions. So yes, of course, we need to see in how far behavior change can have a positive impact, enables us to overcome these crises, social crisis, financial crisis, biophysical crisis. However, loading all the responsibilities on the individuals makes it so overwhelming for the individuals that we are almost like the deer that's struck by the light and can't do anything. So we are don't move at all. And for us as researchers, of course, what's the better framing is acknowledge the responsibility and the ability to act of individuals, but always see them as embedded in the social context, see them as part of groups, and see their behavior also as crucially influenced, not determined, but crucially influenced by the institutional context, by the social context. And for us as individuals, when we are striving for making a good contribution towards a sustainable society, yes, try to do as good as you can as an individual, but then interact with others in groups, have an impact on institutions such that they change, because that's empowering then again, and it can help others to find a way to contribute. So these are 4 avenues.
So taking these answers, seeing that we shouldn't only focus on GDP growth, and we need more interdisciplinarity, and we should measure what matters, look at absolute emissions, for example, instead of only efficiency, and the last one of looking at social context of individuals and the institutional context. Seeing all these aspects, how do you perceive the politics and the policies of the Troika in the Euro crisis?
The problem that we are facing there is that we have muddled through for a very long time. We have allowed for a type of capitalism which really isn't beneficial to a large part of the populations, to benefit a very small part of the population. We've allowed for that. We, economists, politicians, whatever. And we've allowed for it for such a long time that it came to a crash. And without having thought about alternative avenues in good time. And now there are alternatives popping up left and right and so on, but there is no coherent alternative thinking. There are some, but they are not visible enough. So there's no coherent alternative thinking that is perceived by policymakers, and then that's why they are trying to get back to where we were before, where we were actually not providing for the poorest, where we were actually pushing against the planetary boundaries, where we allowed the financial sector to start to dominate the whole economy. So that was all unsatisfactory, but that's what we were trying to get back to. That's ridiculous. But since we haven't thought about enough what alternative structures, what alternative institutions could look like, that's why politicians, understandably, are rushing to. And that's very frustrating to observe, I must say.
And could you sketch out an alternative path for the Euro crisis solution?
Well, I wouldn't say that there is one path. I think that's always important because, well, reality is complex and we know roughly the direction we need to go to, but we don't know exactly what it would look like. There are multiple paths, but we know a lot of things that would need to change. I mean, starting with a very, very basic, very simple case for an eco-tax. It's been argued for decades. And in Austria, where I come from, it's in every decent budget proposal. There is an eco-tax in there. And always just at the 11th hour, oh gosh, it had to be chucked out. And something like a mineral oil tax or something that is often even counterproductive, like subsidies for commuters, comes in. And that's, of course, political games that are going on. And normally the argument against it is, oh, because that would increase the energy prices and therefore it would be harmful for the poorest people. Well, how intellectually offensive is that? Because of course we could think of ways of creating alternative subsidies, more progressive income taxes. I mean, lots of avenues that we could do. Countries have increased value-added tax. That has more regressive effects than introducing an eco-tax. So it's just not desired. It's more difficult for smaller countries. It would be easier if we did it in a bigger block and so on. But there is room for maneuver. And not having used the room for maneuver that we had in good times, and not having even implemented the most basic, like the eco-tax measures, I think that's very frustrating to see. But we just need to keep pushing for it. and come up with better concepts and estimates.
And who are the actors who need to push for this?
All of us. That's the simple answer. I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist, of course trying to push the boundaries of knowledge in such a way that it can be made relevant for policymakers and not remain stuck in the disciplinary silo but interact with others. What I find encouraging is that in the area that I work in, environmental policy, ecological economics, we see an increasing understanding that social and environmental issues need to be discussed together. That's been talked about for a long time, first in development economics and later on in ecological economics, but it was more abstract. Now, labor unions, the Chamber of Labor are becoming interested in environmental policies. That's very encouraging. At the same time, environmental NGOs ought to think more about social issues because they need to be thought together. You can't just push for one of them. And, well, it's easy to say, of course, politicians need to play a more active role in that and be more open-minded and all that. But it's also keep our politicians, remind them about the big picture. For example, the carbon bubble that is being created at the moment. I mean, all the stocks of fossil fuel that we have, the value that is in there, and which actually, if we stick to the 2-degree centigrade limit, it can't be burned. And remind politicians of that, like really big chunks of assets, which are basically stranded. I mean, they can't be used up. And encourage them by pointing them to this big picture to support much more proactively a structural change of our economies, and the structural change, not just relocating all the industry to poorer countries which have lower environmental and social standards, of course, but really a structural change towards a more sustainable economy. But we need really strong arguments and focus on the big picture, don't get lost in the little detailed things.